wouldn't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, no, no. Just remember that I've been true to nobody.
I remember having that big tree in our front yard with a swing on it. I love that swing. Pearl Schaefer's mother, and so we really thought we were something. I'm sure I was taking lead at it. We had these washed out beer bottles that Mother would use sometimes for root beer. So we'd sit in that swing and we'd drink out of our beer bottles, thinking we were really, shocking our neighbor, Mrs. Schaefer.
Some of the first memories that I have is going down to my dad's service station. And I always liked to go and help. Dorothy was older, so he could go down sooner than I could. Dad told us that, well, you have to be a certain age. I don't know how old I was. But every car that came in would have to wash it, and he had some chamois. And so we washed the windows off, and then we used the chamois, had an old washer wringer that would wring it out so it was kind of dry, and then we'd use that to wipe the windows. So we washed the windows, every car that came through. Once in a while, people would look at us and they'd give us a nickel or a dime or something. If we did a real good job, maybe a dime. And so that was fun to get a little bit of a tip once in a while.
One of my favorite memories of that association, we would play a lot of games outside at night in the summer, and just had a lot of fun because we had such a large front yard that we could just play any kind of game. One of the other things that we did was play baseball, and the place where we played baseball was in our backyard in George's field. And the biggest problem with playing baseball in George's field is that he had several big trees there. These were walnut trees. I know they were walnut because we used to get a lot of walnuts and Mother would crack them. In fact, the way she would crack them is that she had an old piston head that I guess had come from our father's shop, old worn out piston head, and then she would have a hammer, a ball-peen hammer, and she put those walnuts on that top of that piston head and crack them. And she would sit in the back, by the back, and crack those walnuts, black walnuts, for hours on end because there were hardly any meat in them. But we'd play out there in that backyard, and anytime somebody threw a ball or try to hit something, it almost invariably hit the tree. So we quickly gave up on that, and then we tried to play in the front yard, and we were afraid of breaking windows, so actually we gave up playing baseball.
On a trip to Salt Lake, Marvin and I were taken by Mother. I think at the time I was probably about 13 years old, maybe a little older, but not a lot. And remember leaving Vernal. We were going to go to visit Aunt Blanche and a few others. And as we got near Parley Summit, we started to hit snow. And that snow started to come down just crazy. And these are the days when it was pretty steep slope. I mean, it still is, but it was pretty rough. And I can still remember what it was like. That snow coming until Mother we couldn't go anymore, and we got stuck a little bit on the side where it was heavy as snow, and the car was sliding and slipping, the tire slipping like crazy. And so we waited, tried to figure out what we could do. Finally said a little prayer, and then I just said, Mother, let me walk up here and see what I can find. And I got out and started walking. I hadn't gone more than about a quarter of a mile when a big tow truck comes by. And so I remember flagging him down and saying, hey, we got this problem. And so he came down and hooked us up and towed us all the way up to Parley Summit. I was 5 years old when my father died, so I really don't remember my father very well. I do remember he was a very kind and gentle man. That's all. I don't ever recall him ever getting upset, mad, spanking me. I don't ever recall that. Don't recall much. I recall going to the service station one time, taking a lunch for him, just vaguely. The service station was just a couple of blocks from our house. I don't know if I went by myself. I would have been
under 5 years of age. But in those days, young children could walk around town by themselves without anybody worrying about them. But I do remember that he was very loving and kind.
So games, now we had the big front yard. We did all kinds of things with it. Mother May I was a game we would play. You know, you go out and can you take a step, Mother May I? And our place was the place that the neighbors gathered. And surely my most memorable birthday party, I'm trying to remember others. I know I had a few others, but was when I was 6 years old. And Mother got the party started, and then she got, and I think it was Donna Lundell came over because she had to leave me. And I was not fully accustomed to knowing just what happened, but she went to the hospital and had a baby boy while I was having my birthday party. So that's how Harold became my twin when I was 6 years old. At a different age, parents would never let their children do what we did. We'd go early in the morning to take off somewhere, and then we would just be back for dinner, you know, in the summertime. And I remember that particularly David and I, but you may have joined in too. We'd go catch frogs, and then we would kill the frogs and cook the frogs' legs.
I remember Mother, when she worked at the courthouse, the old courthouse, as the public health nurse. And the time came they built a new one, and so they tear down the old one. And she asked what they're going to do with the bricks, and I think that they were boxing them up and selling them, but they said, well, you can have any you want. So she put a bunch in her car and brought them home, then she'd go back and get it, next day get another load. I don't remember how many she had, but she brought a bunch of bricks home. And it was my job, I guess. I used a lot of those bricks to make a little outdoor barbecue. We never really used it that much. It didn't draw up the chimney at all. It was kind of weird looking, but it stood there for a long time.
I think I probably was about 8 or 9 years old, and we went Christmas caroling. And of course, because we were all just there in the neighborhood, we didn't have anybody that was particularly brilliant with regard to singing, but I don't know that we were the worst choir either. But we had a good time and went around to the neighbors, and we'd knock on the doors, and as we would knock, we would then as soon as they opened the door, we'd start to sing, as is traditional in Christmas caroling in the neighborhood. The last home we went to was a home that was around the corner, and the inhabitants, it was an elderly lady being taken care of by her daughter. I don't know if her daughter lived there or not, but this was the home of this elderly lady. And the two of them were there together at Christmas time. They invited us in, which was a little unusual because the rest of the people would just listen to us as we sang on the doorstep. So they invited us in and asked us to sing a bunch of songs. So we sang a few songs, and they kept asking us to sing more. And I think we probably sang 3 or 4 songs. We were pretty well through our repertoire. We didn't have much left to sing. And then this little lady said, would you at least sing Silent Night before you leave? So we sang Silent Night to her, and there was just a wonderful spirit there. It was just really a very enjoyable experience there, and we all felt pretty good about that. We laughed and wished everybody a Merry Christmas and went home, and our mother had hot chocolate and popcorn and so forth, and we were ready to get warmed up and went into the house, sat down and started drinking our hot chocolate and eating our popcorn, and the phone rang. Mother went to the phone, answered the phone, and then a few moments later she came back and she said, I just want you to know that Sister so-and-so, the last place where we were, she just passed away. But her daughter said that was such a wonderful thing for you to have come. And that made a big impression on me, that we had been to this lady's home and we had seen her just before she died, and she was very alert, and it was just a great spirit there. So,
but first we had a family trip to Chicago. This is when we went back with Dorothy and Pat to meet their family, and so it was actually just after I got my driver's license as well. So I got to take my turns driving there. And I can certainly remember this is when I first realized, you know what, my eyesight's not so great. Because I'd be driving at night and just the lights coming from the other cars were just blurry. and I mean, I didn't dare tell anybody how difficult of time I had, but whew, that was rough. But I also remember how fun that was being in Chicago. This was when I was convinced I was going to be a chemist. I was going to get a PhD in chemistry. And so Mr. Brighton, of course, was a well-known chemist and had his lab there. And so he took us through the lab and got the chance to see chemists at real work. And boy, did I become enthused about becoming a chemist. That nailed it for me. My goal in life was to be a PhD in chemistry.
My mother is a hero to me. More so became one now that I'm an adult and looking back and seeing all the great things that she did. The most important thing she taught us was to work hard. Well, she taught me to pay tithing and work hard. Those are probably the two biggest principles that I can remember. She taught us to not idle away our time. She made sure that we were working, doing something productive. And most of the time when I was young and she was working, having to support her family, I was working in the garden and I hated it. I despised weeding, but looking back, I realized it was good for me and kept me probably out of a lot of trouble. But we had a large garden and I spent a lot of hours weeding, and she'd get home at noontime and go out and get a little bit cross at me for not having done a good enough job and telling me to go back. Or later in life, I think part of that was just to keep me busy. Again, keep me out of trouble.
But David and I were riding our bicycles out to the Ashley Creek. You know, we'd go way out to Mazer on our bikes and wherever. We'd go anywhere on our bicycles. Anyway, so we'd go out there, and I said, you know, David, I stopped her bike. I said, you know, well, we were riding, I said, you know, if somebody were careless and threw a cigarette out the window of their car, they could really cause problems. And I said, you know, and I just had a match with me. Of course, children back then had matches. I just struck the match, and I threw it down. I said, like that. And immediately the tinder caught fire and just flared up. That was just the weeds at the side of the road, and there's the field beyond. So David and I rushed over and stomped out the fire, but had we not been fast enough, that whole field could have caught on fire. But dear David, he was such a kind person. We slept in that back bedroom that didn't have any heat. And in the winter, you know, the ice is on the winter inside and so on. So I'd get really cold and put my feet on the backs of David's legs. Now, I don't know that he ever complained, but it was a good sport. So we survived that bedroom. It was really something, though.
Mother always liked to go up to Red Canyon Overlook. We'd gone there a few times, not too many. And one time, we had a picnic and we went up there, and Dorothy took one of his friends. I think it was Wayne Johnson, but I'm not sure. And we got up there, and Dorothy's friend said, well, I know how the crevice that you can go in to get down to the bottom. Oh, we didn't know we could, because it's quite a steep drop off. And we searched around and said, here it is. We finally found it and said, let's go down this little crevice down below the cliff. And Mother didn't really want us to, but we were determined to go down below the cliff, so she went with us. And we made our way all the way down to the river. And it was kind of interesting. We played in the river. That was way down below where it is now. And then all of a sudden we looked up and realized, okay, it's 4 o'clock. That sun's ready to go down. It's going to be dark here pretty quick. We'd better head back up. And so we started heading back up, and of course, we made it up a ways, and then all of a sudden we said, oh, this isn't the way, we can't go up this way. So we'd have to backtrack, and some of Dorothy and his friend would go up ahead, and I don't know if Joseph was there, but different ones would go up, try and find the way up out of the canyon. And it was a challenge because we'd go up one way, no, this isn't it, we can't get out this way, you have to go back down. So we'd go back down and go back up another way. And finally we made it up through that same crevice, back up to the top. And I think at that time it was completely pitch dark and something like 10 o'clock at night.
When I was young, we had, the three oldest boys had their own particular mode of transportation. DeWorth had a bicycle, I had a tricycle, and David had a wagon. And I always thought that David having a wagon was pretty neat. He'd put his knee in the wagon and go down the street. And I thought riding a tricycle was a little bit juvenile. But then after I tried to ride David's wagon, putting my knee in the wagon and pushing it, I decided having a tricycle was actually better than having the wagon. And then of course David had the duty of hauling Harold around in the wagon, and then by the time Marvin came along, I think the wagon and the trike were all gone.
My experience applying for the Air Force Academy. And initially, there in my junior year, I guess it was just at the start of my senior year. I had been looking around for scholarships, trying to read up on whatever the good scholarships were, making plans to apply for them. And one of them that caught my eye was the Air Force Academy because it's called free education. Not only that, there's this little stipend they give you while you're going, at least that's what they said in the brochure. So I checked it out, looked at the pictures, and they have these pictures of cadets in uniform and everything just looked glossy, and I thought, wow, I got to try for that. So I put in my application, and it turned out that the first thing you do at that time was I took the civil service exam. And it's like one of these Mensa tests where you have these 4 shapes and you're supposed to pick which 2 look the same, or which one is the next one in sequence to the other 3 or whatever like that. So you had a lot of shapes, and it was kind of a basic IQ kind of test. Anyway, apparently I did real well on it. So here I was, an applicant, 1 of 11. And I didn't have any concept of what that really meant until I went to Hill Air Force Base, because that's where we had to go next. It said we had to go there for physical exams and for sort of a general, that was part of our evaluation, to have us do different physical exercises and so forth. And so I got there and I meet the other 10 candidates. Well, one of them was a real tall guy, probably about 6'3", very muscular, Mr. All-American. I wasn't bad. There were several of the guys that did worse than me, but I certainly was nowhere near the top. I was probably just hanging in the middle. I went home and just pretty much told Mother that, nah, I won't get it. So I went on, and after another month went by, I didn't hear anything. I figured, okay. So I went ahead and put in my application to BYU. I had to pay them money for the meal tickets and set up a deposit for the dorm and so forth. And I mean, I literally, and now the 1st of May has come along, and to me it's pretty obvious. BYU is where I'm going to go. I was making plans. And of course graduation was like the 28th of May. So by the 1st of May, it was a done deal, except on the second week of May, I get a phone call. I'm getting ready to leave for work, to work at the Vernal Express. The phone call says, we need to talk to Harold Rust. I say, well, that's me. They say, well, we have a telegram here from Senator Moss. Would you like us to deliver it now? And it's like, or do you want us to just read it? I said, just read it, quick. And then they announced, well, you have been selected for the Air Force Academy. I mean, I just about fell over backwards. It was such a surprise to me.
Growing up, I'm sure my mother was very sensitive that we were without a father, but she made up for it. She was a trooper. She took us a lot of different places. She made sure that life was exciting for us, that we got to go on little adventures. We were constantly having picnics. Sometimes it would just be at the Johnston's next door, but it was exciting to be doing little things like that. We would go fishing. We'd have one of the first times I ever caught a fish was Cartcrete, when she took us to Cartcrete and caught a fish. It was so exciting. She would take us hiking. One of my other brothers has talked about the adventure we had hiking down to the Green River. But she would just take us to a lot of places, and we'd go on little vacations. I'm sure that she really sacrificed for us to be able to do that, just paying for the gas. I remember the first sort of vacation that we went on was to Yellowstone, and we stayed in a little cabin there. My grandfather Cutler went with us, and it was a real special event. Although Joseph did scare me by trying to get me lost one time, and he tried to make life a little miserable for me, but I've forgiven him a long time ago. There are a lot of other trips that we've done. We took a trip to Denver, and I remember that was a fun little experience because my Aunt Neoma went with us, and her son, my cousin Kay, came along with his big Harley motorcycle. And part of the way I got to ride on his Harley motorcycle, and that was pretty exciting. Then we took a special trip to Chicago, and this was an event that I don't know how it came about, but we joined Dorothy and Pat shortly after they were married, so this was sort of their honeymoon trip. Harold and I and Mother went with them to Chicago, and that was very exciting because we got to stay at the Pat's home in Barrington Heights, and oh my goodness, that was just luxury. We thought that was amazing, just an amazing place. They had their own, well, they were on a private lake. We got to fish. It was pretty exciting. We went to a bunch of the museums there and had the first McDonald's hamburger. This was 1960. I remember distinctly. Back in those days, the McDonald's hamburger was pretty small, and Pat's dad, as he was ordering, said, "Well, you probably want to get a couple of these." But it was the first time we'd ever experienced fast food. It was the first time I recall ever having a purchased hamburger. We didn't go out to eat when I grew up, and given the economics of the time, I can understand why. But it was pretty exciting.
So I remember at Doc's Beach. I don't know, Marvin, if you ever went to Doc's Beach, roller skating. Well, I should have learned my lesson then, that I shouldn't be on skates or anything like that, because I fell down and broke my arm. There was the bone protruding out from my arm. Well, I got it set, and I was in a cast and so on. Where there was a gravel pit with enough water in it, we'd go swimming. Well, I've never been swimming before, and it's probably Larry Burke that taught me. I don't know. He said, "Look, this is the way to dog paddle." So I got out there and I started dog paddling. I thought, man, this is great. It was so fun. That was my swimming. It was just dog paddling. So the following week, we went to another gravel pit, and Mother was with some children on the side of the pond, really, where the water flowed in. And I went out to swim. I had to go out deep enough that I could really start swimming, because, of course, I learned the week before, right? And now here I am going to swim. Well, I stepped out and I stepped into a hole. I stepped into the hole and I went all the way down. I forgot everything I'd ever learned about swimming, which was just a little simple dog paddle. And I came up, gasping, hadn't swallowed water. I went down the second time, came up, and I was going down the third time, and I knew, and I guess that there's some truth to that. You go down the third time and you're dead. I knew I was going to go down, I was going to die. Mother had seen me, I missed him. However, she waded in and pulled me out. I coughed up all kinds of water, but I survived, obviously. We went to Merkley Park, and I taught Connie Lundell to go with me all the way up. If you remember Merkley Park, David would remember this, where you climb way up till you can get on top of the plateau, up on top there, but it was kind of tricky, and you get all the way through the rocks and so on. And it was a big adventure. So we got up there and walking around, and there was a rattlesnake, and kind of moved away from that. And then I couldn't remember how to get back. And I thought, we're lost. And there's no way down. I didn't, there's just sort of a little crevice. Well, mother, pregnant mother, climbed up and found us. So we made our way back.
Dorothy and I had the opportunity of going with our dad and grandparents down to Bryce Canyon, down to Caneville, to the homestead of where Grandpa grew up. I think Dad had wanted to take him on a trip down there for several years, and finally talked him into it. And so we got up, and I remember we went down, picked up Grandpa and Grandma, and Grandma always made delicious chicken. So we had some chicken for that first lunch that she took with us as a lunch. Went down through Loa and Bicknell and down through Fruta, down through the Capitol Wash. And at that time, I don't think you can drive through there now, but that time we drove right through that wash. In some places the road was right in the riverbed in the sand. And there wasn't much space between the walls. It was right there. We got over to Caneville, and I remember my dad was asking his father, which is your cabin? There were a few cabins around, and he said, well, I think it should be right here. And there was a cabin there, and my dad said, well, that's it, isn't it? No, I don't think so. And never did find one that looked like the home where my grandpa had grown up. But I think my dad said, well, yeah, that's it. It's right where it's supposed to be. But Grandpa said no. And then as we came back, they wanted to go down through Escalante. And just outside of, after you get through the Capitol, there was a little road that turned down, but we missed it. And we came back, and Grandpa said, well, I know there's a road that goes down. And finally we saw it. There was a little dirt road taken off, just like a little track. And there was a sign, said something about, I think it was Boulder Mountain or something. So we went down, and I don't remember much of that trip because it was dark. And my dad drove and drove and drove on this dirt road over the mountain. And finally he couldn't take anymore, so he just stopped in the road and he slept until the sun came up, and then we continued on over the mountain down into Boulder. And I think that there was one gas station, and he got some gas, and then he said, well, where's a place we could get something to eat? Because there was really no town, no grocery stores, nothing. And the man said, well, that house up the road, they usually will have a meal that you could buy, breakfast. And so we went up there and knocked on the door. Could we get some breakfast? Sure, come on in. So we had, I don't know, pancakes and eggs or something, nice, delicious breakfast, and then continued on our way to Escalante, and then I think we headed back home. Oh, let's see, from Escalante, we went in the back way to Bryce, that's right, and stayed there at Bryce. And it was really interesting in Bryce because my dad had worked there. And so he took us into the restaurant and said, well, you two order anything you want on the menu. I'm going to go back and talk to some of my old friends that are back here. And so he left us, and he went to talk with whoever was back there, and we were ordering and looking at the menu, and I didn't know what to order. And Dora said, oh, look, here's a rare steak. I wonder what kind of animal that is, whether it's zebra or elephant or just what kind of an animal it is. And he said, would you like to try that? No. I ordered turkey, something that I knew would be okay. And he ordered the rare steak. And it came, and we ate it. And afterwards, my dad asked us how our meal was. And of course, we said it was great. But Dora said, well, mine was real good, except that it wasn't cooked all the way.
I had a bicycle that was really a fancy bicycle, and I really enjoyed it. And one day it was missing, and I tried to figure out how I could have lost that bicycle. I was there in Vernal, and I never misplaced it. It was taken, and I couldn't figure out how it could have been taken. And then, maybe 2 months later, I was there in downtown Vernal, and there was in front of a store was my bicycle. And I knew it was my bicycle because it had a yellow cord around the seat where which had the tag for the bicycle when we bought it. And I'd never taken that cord off. And so I waited, and when the kid came out to take the bicycle, I said, "That's my bicycle. Somebody took it from me." And he didn't say a word and turned around and left. And I took my bicycle and retrieved it.
When I was 16 years old, I had watched Joseph and Budge make they call it an orange crate canoe made out of orange crates. And they had made it over at Budge's garage, and they went through all the process. And I was so psyched about it, I thought, man, that would be neat. So I was able to work it with them that they just gave me all their forms that they had made. So I started with the forms, and then on my own, I put in the oak keel. That's what you secure first. Then you get the orange crates, went out, and there were a lot of orange crates in those days. I don't know, I don't see them very often now. But the orange crates were just thin wood that's probably a little over a quarter of an inch thick, made out of good hard wood. And you just form the side and the gunnels down below, and glue and secure it and screw it in at the ends. And then you just start planking on the orange crates, and then finally trim them, sand it a little bit, and then cover it with canvas, put on a special paint, and it shrinks it tight, and boom, I had a canoe. And I was just really proud of that canoe because I did it all by myself, literally. We just had one lake up in the mountain we could go to. It was about the only time. So I probably only used it about 4 or 5 times, then it just sat in the back and gradually just rotted.
We loved parades. Vernal had at least one parade a year, probably, as I recall, 24th of July parade maybe. And it seemed like they had a rodeo parade and maybe something else. Most of the parades, as I was growing up, was just primarily horses, but in the earlier days, the kids would really dress up their bicycles, and it would be a pretty exciting event. I know they had a Kids' Day parade. I remember that distinctly. And in fact, I had a sort of a Davy Crockett outfit that I remember I lent to Dean Landon, and he won a bicycle, brand new bicycle, by wearing my outfit. Sort of made me mad that I hadn't worn it, but I was older then and didn't think that was right for me to be in the kids' parade. But anyway, we loved the parades, and I just loved to dress up in whatever different little costumes and put crepe paper on our bicycles and be in the parade. It was just sort of a special thing.
But one of the great adventures for me, I mean, it was really exciting, was the boy when Daddy took us fishing on Cart Creek. And, there's certain things that you just remember forever. I can see the creek, I can see the trees, I can see I could almost go to the same location on Cart Creek, where I went sort of upstream. I was going to, well, maybe it's not downstream. Anyway, I was going in a northerly direction, and know that part. But I was sort of by myself, and I cast my fly at some distance into the creek. It's not a very wide creek, but a lot of fish there anyway. So I cast into the creek and got not just a bite, I pulled the fish out. And to me it was big. It may have been at least 12 inches, I think it was. Anyway, that trout, I was so excited to catch that trout. That was a wonderful experience. I was really excited about going to the first grade because then I could learn to read. Well, I think I caught on to it about the first week of school. And you may have a picture of me reading to my brothers, but I love to read. I just, and I recall later, I don't know, may have been some little thing in junior high. They said, what is your favorite place, favorite thing to do? My favorite place was the library, I said. I love to go to the library. Although I read P.G. Wodehouse. I read so many of his books, and Daddy would say, well, Dilworth said, read something to really build your mind and you learn from it. He was a little disappointed that I'm spending so much time with P.G. Wodehouse. He was right, of course, and now I'm in church history and reading church history and other things of much more value. And so I wasted a fair amount of time on P.G. Wodehouse. I remember when we all sang together, dressed up in different military uniforms, you have the pictures, and sang "This is the Army, Mr. Jones." I could still sing that song. I know all the words to "This is the Army, Mr. Jones." No private baths or telephones and so on. But we sang that on stage, and that was a fun thing.
One experience that I had, well, not one experience, a bunch of experiences. When our father passed away, somebody had to milk the cow. Before, he had always milked it. I think that we may have helped a little bit before, but not really. And so when he passed away, Mother may have milked it, I don't know, but she said, "David, you've got to be the one that milks the cow." Dilworth was, I think, working at the service station, and so I had to do it. So I milked the cow, and it was okay. We'd take it down. The only times I had problems with that old cow was trying to get it down to the pasture. It did not want to go. I was trying to lead it by hand, and it did not want to go. A couple of times we had to take it by the car, and it did not want to go. Likewise, it didn't want to come back. And other times that it was no fun is when it was in heat. And so we had to sometimes get the veterinarian to come, and when it was with a calf, it was okay. But other times, no, it was no fun at all. But yeah, milk that every morning and every night, and when it was in the pasture down where I live now on 500 North, I guess it was, I went on my bike, and so I had to carry the bucket of milk on my bike down, and then ride it all the way back. And that was I think that by the time I got back, sometimes the milk was half churned.
In Vernal, we had a number of years that there was a lot of snow. So much so that when they cleared the streets, they couldn't pile it on the sides because, they did pile it on the sides, but there was still snow left over, so they piled it in the middle. So as you would drive down the streets, you would not be able to see traffic coming the other way except for the intersections. And as a result of all of that snow, we have big piles of snow that we got excited about sledding down. It obviously wasn't high, maybe about 6 or 7 feet, but that was pretty high for us as young kids. And so there we were sledding on these piles of snow that would go down to the street. Of course, we had to be careful about not sliding out into the street. And then it took them a long time to start hauling away all that snow, and they had to get big dump trucks to haul away all of that snow that was piled up. And it was so cold it froze all of the snow, and so you could walk on top of the snow. And that was really pretty exciting because we had all of these fields in our backyard. And we would simply walk over the fences because the snow was sufficiently high that it filled up almost to the top of all of the fences. So for us, we didn't have to climb any fences, and we had this vast place that we could just walk all over the place. There was nothing to stop us, and just vast fields of frozen snow. And even though it was really cold, we just had a great time out in that snow.
Okay, sleigh riding. Well, Vernal was a great place for a young kid to grow up, because I still remember when I was just first grade, the snow was literally up to my head. It just seemed like snow was everywhere. And so there were many of the winters that we were able to go sledding, but one of the special times of all was when I think it was in about the 5th grade, and we all went up to what is now just above Staniker, and there was a nice long road that got packed down real well by logging trucks or some kind of trucks driving through there. And so it was just perfect for sleds. So I remember Bill Schaeffenmeyer and I were sharing a sled, and So I was on the bottom, he was on top, and we got going down, and we were just cutting away. We were really having a great time. We got to that last turn, and I had to turn real sharp, and kaboom, we flipped over and just landed in some rocks. Well, I had a hood on, so I didn't think too much about it other than I really kind of a sore head. Well, walking back up, I flipped my hood off, and Billy looks at me and says, "Ah, you're bleeding." And sure enough, I had somehow scabbed my head in such a way so that it looked really bloody. But they convinced me I had to go home. So that's the only time I got to go down that hill. I went home, and they had to sew a couple of stitches in it. And to this day, when I comb my hair in that place, if I don't watch it, I can catch an edge of that scar. When we were without a father, my mother became the best set of parents that any child could have. I miss my father. I'm sorry I didn't have a father during my formative years, and I'm sure I would have learned many things, but she made sure that she taught us some things that he valued. And I wish that I would have listened more intently on some of those things, or not listen. I listened well. I didn't necessarily always follow the advice. One of them was that if you're going to get something, get the best you can. Don't settle for buying something cheap. Buy something that has good value. Save up for it, and buy it when you can afford it. Another thing that she taught me, and I certainly heard it from others, was how honest our father was. Just honest in all of his dealings. Didn't try to cheat anybody. And I really appreciated that lesson, that he was a good, hard-working, honest man.
I remember the kinds of things we did with cars, but I have to tell one on myself. I fell out of a car when I was a child. Okay, but then there was the time when Daddy left me alone at the gas station, service station back then, and I thought, well, this is really cunning. I'm going to kind of practice driving because I could kind of pull a car back and forth. And somebody left their car to have the car greased. I may have told you this story, but anyway, for the record, since I never confessed it before, Daddy never knew, or at least I don't think he did. He may have known that I moved the car, I don't know. So I thought, I'm going to do my daddy a favor. I'm going to pull that car into the grease pit. Remember the grease pit? You just pull right over it. So I pull it in, but I pull it in on an angle, and the left rear tire dropped right into the grease pit. So there I was. I was really stuck. I shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. I had no idea what to do. And that's where inspiration hit. I probably prayed. I do remember that I got in spots and I learned to pray and prayed. So the idea came, get a bumper jack up the car, put boards under the car crosswise, and then very carefully back that car off, which I did, and tried to put it back where it came from. I was so grateful for that answer to that problem. I remember going pheasant hunting with Daddy, and that was really exciting. And he gave me a 410 shotgun, and wow, that was some experience to shoot my first pheasant. But I remember going out to, particularly I think we would go out south Vernal Avenue, some distance out of there in these wheat fields and whatever, to go pheasant hunting. But I remember we had some really good meat, venison and pheasant. And it associates in my mind with the fact that we today would be considered to be way below the poverty line, but we were not. I never felt poor before our father died and after Daddy died. And I marvel at how Mother managed things so well in terms of providing and making things good for us all. And I think you almost have to be a parent or maybe even a grandparent at this stage just to realize how she did it.
I remember that Dad, because he worked at the service station, he never took time off. But one 4th of July, he did close the station and came home, and we had a picnic of watermelon and so on the front lawn. And that was really fun to have him home and having a time with him together.
We had a number of ponds in the area which would freeze. And one of the things that would happen is that the kids who lived nearby, they would want to make sure that the ice was nice and smooth, so they would turn on some water over the top of it so that it would get water on the top, and then they'd turn off the water and it would freeze on the top, and we'd have a nice clean sheet of ice. And apparently one time that happened and they broke the valve, and the farmer was so mad that he let all of the water out so that there was no water in the pond at all. But when he did that, it was during the night that it froze, and so as he was letting all this water out, all of the ice sank to the bottom of the pond. So now instead of having a flat surface, we had this surface of ice that went up and down all over the contour of the pond. And so we put on our skates, and then we would slide down the pond down to the bottom of the pond, and then skate all around the bottom of the pond. But it was kind of hard to get out, so we'd have to take out skates and climb out. But that was really fun to skate over all of this contoured ice.
Okay, this is a story about my father, our father, and his effort in helping the final push toward the building of the UN Stake Center, which was also going to be the Vernal 3rd Ward, the ward we lived in. And this was in the either 49 or 50. It was right that late time when the Stake Center was, those were the days when the wards had to come up with a significant part of the total amount. The church headquarters contributed only 20 or 30% toward the building, and the rest had to be the local. And so you can imagine the challenge it was that they constantly had fundraisers and people donating lumber and donating bricks, and just an awfully lot of labor that had to be donated as they were building up the building. Well, they're getting close to the finish, but they were close enough that they were able to have a date set for when it was going to be dedicated. Someone from church headquarters, and we can't remember whether it was one of the apostles or even somebody in the church presidency, but somebody's going to come out and dedicate it. But in that final meeting with the church headquarters on kind of reviewing the status, it was made clear that that there was still a significant amount that had to be raised, that had to be paid in before the building could be dedicated. And our father was a member of the bishopric that was responsible for the building fund. So he'd been doing all that he could for the previous several years of the fundraisers and donated labor and so forth. And they were just kind of at wit's end. How can we get this last bit of money that's needed to put us over the top so we can dedicate it? That our father went to some savings that he had been saving for several years in order to buy a brand new house. And he took those savings out and turned that over to the church so they could finish and dedicate that stake center. The stake center, which is still there, right next to the temple, next to that temple, which our mother watched right up to just before the dedication of the temple, something that was a pride for her. And I'm sure that while she was watching the temple being built, she thought back about all the hours and the labor and the finances that have been put into that stake center that's still beautiful and standing.
I've got to pay tribute to my brothers. I have looked up to every one of them. They've set such a great example for me. Going on missions, I know when I grew up, I was going to go on a mission simply because my brothers went on a mission. And as I indicated, they set an example for hard work. They were always working, and that was a great example for me. I appreciated Harold. Didn't particularly appreciate it at the time. He was a hard-working young man, and I always looked up to him as having more ambition and more ability to work hard than anybody else I ever knew. And of course, when I was young and growing up with Joseph, he was a challenge. Joseph, because he's probably the middle child, felt that he needed to have somebody to boss around, and unfortunately I was it. But I've forgiven him many times, and Joseph is a great example as well for me. Each one of my brothers, David, just a sweet spirit, kind, gentle person. They were always the leader. And of course, Joseph was very intelligent, and well, all of them are intelligent, but very creative. Harold, just a hard-working guy, and I just appreciated every one of my brothers. Obviously, more so now that I'm an adult than growing up with him. But it is remarkable to me that I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that we just really appreciated and respected each other, and have such really close bonds as adults. I want them to know that as the youngest in the family, that they have meant a lot to me in my life.